Up next on Way of the Renaissance Man, taking a few trips around the sun and sharing life's wisdom with retired Air Force and commercial airline pilot Crosby Ruff.
Welcome to the Way of the Renaissance Man podcast. This is a show about ideas, personal empowerment, and celebrating the rational life. Our goal is to help each other discover the tools needed to better focus our minds, integrate our thoughts with actions, and live the lives we really want. I'm your host, Jim Woods.
When someone sees you at a professional investing conference and says, "Hey, I really like your stuff," you know that's a pathway to making a new and deep friendship. That's how Jim and former Air Force and Delta Airlines pilot Crosby Ruff met. And after enjoying a beer together, Jim and Crosby discovered they had a whole lot more in common than just the military and a love of investing. In this episode, you'll learn about Crosby's journey from college student to Air Force pilot and from school teacher to commercial airline pilot. Plus, hear the fascinating story of Crosby's close brush with death and how his decisive action during an intense nor'easter storm narrowly averted the disaster of his commercial airliner plunging into the frigid waters surrounding Newark Airport. Crosby Ruff is an example of someone who lives the Renaissance man ethos, a man who exhibited extreme grace under pressure, and someone who trusts himself and his training to get through the most extreme circumstances. It's often said that people come into your life that make a lasting impression. Crosby Ruff is one of those people, and you'll find out why in this episode. And now, here's Jim's conversation with Crosby Ruff.
So every once in a while, you're at a professional conference, and somebody comes up to you and says, "Hey, I know you. I really like your stuff." That's about as good of an intro as you're ever going to get to becoming a friend with someone. And I'm with such a person right now, Mr. Crosby Ruff. Welcome to the Way of the Renaissance Man podcast.
Thanks, Jim. It's great to be here. It's good to see you again.
Yes. We've made it a habit here lately of seeing each other at conferences.
We have. I think it was Dallas, was it, last October?
That's exactly right. Dallas last year. You bought me a beer. And I never turned that down.
Absolutely. And then we quickly changed our subjects from military history, past personal history, to changed it to that from investing and everything else.
So yeah, we were at the Money Show, and we were talking about, and you subscribe to one of my newsletters, Fast Money Alert.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And I'm assuming you were happy with it at this point.
Very happy. In fact, I felt like I was meeting a rock star and a famous person when I actually saw you in person.
Oh, you're too kind, my friend.
Because I think your personality is much more ebullient and bubbly and happy and positive and everything, compared to when I originally saw you and Mark Skousen. You were kind of very subdued and everything. And I thought, this guy's really a deep thinker and a straight guy, straight thinker.
Yeah.
And when I met you, you're just like the guy you'd sit having a beer with. And just enjoy.
Well, thank you very much.
Candid conversation.
We have to be true to ourselves, my
Absolutely.
friend, in this world.
Yes, sir.
We only got a few trips around the sun.
That's right.
So speaking of trips around the sun, trips around the world. Yeah. So you were not only had a long career in the Air Force as a pilot.
Right.
You also had a tremendously long career as a commercial air pilot for Delta.
Right.
So tell me a little bit about your background here. How did you get in the? Did you always want to fly, or
well,
did you?
Not really. I going way back to the last century, in the early 1970s, I guess it was. I ran across a girlfriend at the University of South Carolina, where I was a student, and her dad was a retired Air Force pilot from Andrews Air Force Base, Maryland, where the Air Force One is. And he never flew Air Force One. He was a World War II pilot. But being around her and being around her family, they were from Maryland, I started asking questions. Well, pilots, Air Force pilots, they're like astronauts or something, right? You got to be a special breed. And she said, no, you need a bachelor's degree and 20/20 vision. I said,
I could
I'm
do
going
that.
to get
yeah.
a bachelor's degree in a couple of years, and I do have 20/20 vision. So I applied for Air Force ROTC. It was the worst possible time. It was the 73, 74. It was the end of the Vietnam War. It was
There was a reduction in force at
absolutely
that point. Yeah.
a liberal Democratic Congress. There were gas lines and fuel crisis. You know,
I remember it well.
And so it was a tough time to do it, but I plodded through and got my commission as a second lieutenant. And when they pinned on the gold bar, they said, "Go home, don't call us, we'll call you when we will let you come on active duty." Well, it turned out to be, it was 14 months later.
Wow.
And I had a bachelor's.
That's a big delay.
Absolutely.
That's a long time especially for a 20-something kid. You know,
Really
14
was.
months is forever.
Yes, and nobody would hire me. I had a bachelor's degree in business, but nobody would hire me because they knew I had an obligation for the Air Force for 6 or 7 years. So I actually packed up my car, moved to Vermont, drove a tractor in an apple orchard in the fall in Rutland, Vermont, and then worked in a ski lodge at Killington as a desk clerk and a part-time bartender. And later went into the Air Force, not as a pilot, but as a contracting officer. So I became a bureaucrat with a desk job, which I absolutely did not like. And I applied.
Is hated the right word?
Hate is a pretty good word.
Pretty close, right?
And so I.
You don't kind of strike me as a desk job type of guy.
I hated it. Hated it. I mean, I thought I'd have to slit my wrist if I became a bureaucrat.
One more form, right?
Yes.
I understand.
And so I applied for pilot training from within, and I later went as a captain, which is delayed, and I flew KC-135 tankers for the Air Force. And later,
those are the big refuelers.
Big Boeing 707 refuelers, and had a near midair collision one time, which got my attention sort of. But otherwise, flying, even military flying in peacetime, is fairly sane and predictable and everything. You've heard the saying, flying is hundreds and hundreds of hours of boredom interspersed with moments of sheer terror.
Yeah, exactly.
So
that's infantry combat as
right,
well.
That's man. And so I did that, and then I flew actually navigator training, flying classrooms, which were Boeing 737-200s.
It's interesting that you had the Boeings you had that you kind of cut your teeth on those big planes like that,
right?
Because that served you well as to transitionally. It was a lot easier than being like a fighter pilot or something like that.
It was. It helped me get hired, I think, and of course Delta loves military pilots,
right?
Air Force or Navy, and so that's almost like the biggest gold resume. Thing. Oh, you're a military pilot.
Foot in the door a golden foot in the door.
Exactly.
I got you.
So after I retired as a major, I took the early retirement in the Air Force, 18 years and 2 months, and got pretty much full retirement as a major. Then I moved to Greenville, South Carolina. Had a master's degree. Figured Greenville has a new BMW plant there, all these engineers. It's more engineers in Greenville County, South Carolina than any county in the nation. They'll hire me. I put out 70 resumes. Guess how many interviews I got? 0.
Yep.
But I pre-registered our 3 small kids in a private Christian school, and the school administrator looked at my resume and said, "Have you ever considered teaching? Because we need a math, science, and Bible teacher for the 8th grade." I said, "I'd love to consider doing that," since I didn't have a job.
Yeah, exactly.
That sort of influenced my.
Somehow we love to do things when we need to do things, right?
Exactly. So I did that for 3 years. I had the privilege of teaching my 13-year-old daughter, who used to say before the school year began, "Dad, please find another job. Please don't teach me." And so
she didn't want to be she wanted to go to school every day, see her dad there.
Exactly. And
enough, Dad.
Yeah. So on the first day of school, when she's back in the middle of the pack in the class, and I'm taking the roll alphabetically, and my last name is Ruff, R-U-F-F, and we actually pronounce it Roof. So I said, Lauren Ruff, or Roof, how do you pronounce that? She gave me the dirtiest look and didn't say anything.
Did she get it right, though?
Oh yeah. So, and then the next thing I said was, "I know your parents. They're great people. I know your mom and dad." So everybody chuckled in the class because they knew that she was my daughter.
Right.
Or I was her father. But anyway, after 3 years, I realized I couldn't afford to put braces on the teeth of my 3 kids and buy them new clothes when their shoe size changed every 2 months. My salary.
Funny how that works like
that. Oh my
that.
goodness. My first year salary.
You got to get back to flying.
Yeah. Take a guess what my first year salary teaching Christian school.
$12,000.
Well, you're real close. 16,900.
There you go.
16,900. So I knew that
you're balling over that 69.
Oh my goodness! Yes, I knew I couldn't survive doing that. No,
yeah, you can't buy one of those BMWs that they make down the street from you.
That's right. You can't even rent one of those.
So then you decided to go back into flying.
I did, and I dusted off my flying resume, applied for Delta. And they were desperate, so they hired me. You know, I figured I got in, and
somehow I don't believe you, but that's okay.
Well, you know, it's interesting. Ever since they hired me, and this is just a coincidence. I'm being self-deprecating, but they hired me, and according to my resume and track record, I had not been in a cockpit and flown in 5 years.
That's a long time.
I taught school for 3 years, and my last 2 years in the military, in the Air Force, I had a desk job again. So 2 + 3, 5 years of no flying at all, and they hired me. And shortly thereafter, everybody that I talked to from the military that got hired or interviewed with airlines, they said, "Oh no," they say you gotta be current within the last couple of 2 or 3 months. You got to be current. You got to be current. You have to be flying currently. So I thought, man, they didn't do that with me. I guess I slipped in.
Yeah, you slipped through the crack. Well, it was that magnetic personality, man. You talked your way in.
Must have been.
So almost every pilot I know, and every truck driver I know, everybody that has kind of an operational thing, they always have 1 or 2 kind of almost died stories, man. So tell me one of those. I know you've had a few.
Okay, I can give you one. A year or 2 before I retired from Delta, which was kind of a keeper, and it burned an indelible impression on my mind, to put it lightly. Started out a 4-day rotation, which is 4 days of flying, 3 or 4 flights a day for 4 days, out of Atlanta. I was the captain of the MD-88 and had a super nice co-pilot that I just met, and we were flying for the first time. I flew the first leg up from Atlanta to LaGuardia, New York City. Mm-hmm. We call it LaGarbage, but it's LaGuardia. You know, it actually is. It's like 40 years of New York City garbage dredged down and packed
down and put with water
under the runways.
Right.
That's what I've heard.
I've heard that too.
So anyway, we went up there, and there were warnings about a nor'easter coming.
Right.
And so I thought, man, we need to get out of here pretty quickly. Let's get gassed up and catered, and let's load the people up. And the sooner we get out of here, the better it is. And so the gate wasn't available. So, you know, everything at LaGuardia is delayed or late or messed up.
Right.
It seems like. So we finally got a gate. Our plane came in with a gate, and they started loading us up. And then the snow started falling. Then the wind started picking up, and we had every seat full. I think there was 157 souls on board, including the crew of 5. And I think you even had Delta Airlines. Delta's president's daughter was on board. I found out later, which I didn't realize.
You wouldn't have done anything different, but it would have made you a little bit nervous.
Didn't do anything different. But I'm thinking we need to get out of here, and we're going to West Palm Beach, Florida, which is 78 degrees and sunny, and we'll be walking on the beach tomorrow, and we just need to get out of New York.
Yeah.
And so the plane starts.
Escape from New York.
Yes.
The Crosby Ruff story.
Yep. And the plane starts shaking, and the heavy snow starts falling, and
I can't imagine what that would be like from the cockpit. Even from the behind, if you've been in bad weather, it sucks. Even when you're getting ready to jump out of that plane, it sucks like that if it's turbulent.
It's terrible. And I'm thinking the whole time, the sooner we get out of here, the better. So I closed up the door. We got everybody on board, closed up the door, turned on the anti-collision light. It called for pushback. And they said, you'll be number 3 for de-icing, anti-icing, because of all the ice on the wings and everything. So I said, okay. So that took forever. That literally took like an hour and a half. And they either ran out of fluid.
Just came over.
Oh, it's just getting worse and worse by the minute. And they're starting to different airlines are starting to cancel flights, and we're already dispatched because we've already pushed back, and the gate agents all just washed their hands of us and left, and we're out there as if we're dispatched, we're flying. It's all my show then. And it took, like I say, an hour and a half or two to get de-iced 3 times. And they even told me over the phone from the truck down below, they even said, we're not sure if this de-icing fluid is good. We're checking it. So please do, make sure it is good. So finally they squared us away. They sufficiently de-iced us. We taxied out, heavy snow, winds are like 30 knots from a direct 80 to 90 degree crosswind, which is very, very dangerous.
Yeah, super, yeah.
And so in the airline business, what you do is usually the captain takes the first leg, then the first officer takes it. You take every other one. So it was my first officer's turn to fly. Well, as it turned out, I let him do it, but he was a great guy. He was a former Navy instructor pilot, but he had been away from Delta for 7 years, serving in the Navy, and he was brand new as an airline pilot returning to Delta.
Right.
So
then welcome back.
I said, this will be great for you to do this. Go ahead. And then I sort of changed my mind. I said, this is absolute maximum, right at the edge of legality of even flying and taking off. I better do it. He said, okay, sure, no problem. Go ahead, Crosby. And so I changed my mind one last time when the winds lightened up just a hair as heavy snow's blowing sideways across the runway. And at LaGuardia, it's a short runway, 7,000 feet, and there's water at the end. The temperature, I believe, was like 12 to 14 degrees.
Yeah, you're in that drink, you're not coming out of it.
Right. And so I said, okay, we got clear for takeoff. Go ahead. I can't remember his name now, but a super nice guy. So we pushed up the throttles. The first thing you say is when the airspeed comes alive, is you say, if I can remember, I've been retired 4 years now. You say 80 knots thrust normal, and you're looking at parallel needles on all 5 or 6 of the engine gauges, and you can feel the thrust. And of course, the colder it is, the better the thrust.
Right.
So I could feel that we were blasting off, even though we were maximum gross weight. And then as soon as we got to 80 knots, the airspeed indicators froze at 80 knots. And I thought, what in the world? So I quickly looked at his, and his froze also identical. And we were still accelerating. And then I looked up and I saw the runway remaining markers, 4,000, 3,000, 2,000 in front of us. And if you don't start coming unstuck and take off by 2,000, you'll go in the drink.
Right.
So all I could do, I knew if
I had to pull up.
Right. And I knew if I aborted then that we would decelerate and slow down and be down to about 40 or 50 or 60 miles per hour as we went down into 12 degree water with 40 mile per hour heavy snow
You're not
winds.
coming out of that.
It would be like the Titanic victims. It would be like needles going into it. It would be a painful, agonizing, slow death for 157 people. Nobody could have gotten to us. So it was one of those things where 38 years of flying experience, I instantly said, we got to get airborne. So I said, I've got the aircraft. I took it from him, waited till 2,000 feet remaining, looking at 80 knots, and we needed 150 knots to lift off. But I knew we were faster than that. And
you had to trust your gut on that.
Exactly. And I lifted off within 100 feet. We're completely in the weather. And of course, there's the New York Mets Stadium right in front of us.
You saw it down there. You knew you were safe.
And there were, or
at least you thought maybe.
You couldn't see anything because now you're airborne. And what I did is I firewalled the engines right when I took the airplane. And they tell us accurately that if you have to firewall the engines, you can count on, you can be depend on reliable engines. They will work, and they'll add 15% more power. So I didn't know our speed, so I just firewalled them. We took off. We got above the clouds. In the first few seconds, you're going above 10, 15, 20-story apartment buildings and the Mets Stadium and everything, and we had to do a radar departure with a turn and everything. Quickly got the gear up and the flaps up. Then I looked over at the 2 engine gauge both engines, the series of gauges, there were red lights flashing that it was overheating. And then, so I pulled them back gently after we were going through 2,000 or 3,000 feet. And then I smelled through the air conditioning vent system, the smell of burning engines. And that'll get your adrenaline up. And I knew that LaGuardia was closed. We could not legally go back there. The weather was too bad. So I told the first officer, I said, call departure control, declare an emergency, tell them we need immediate vectors for a full stop landing at JFK, the international
not far,
airport, which is a really long runway. So it all kind of worked out.
And then you took it down there?
We took it down there. We had to go through all these things. I told the passengers, I said, ladies and gentlemen, we've had frozen airspeed indicators on takeoff. I had to firewall the engines. We've oversped and overheated both engines. We've declared an emergency. We're landing at Kennedy. I'll get back with you later. And of course, we're busy as, three-arm coat hanger. And, make a long story short, we came back around and we landed right into the wind, which is very favorable, a headwind, which lowers your ground speed. And I saw the most beautiful sight in the world. I saw a snow-packed runway right in front of us, 2 miles long. I made one of the smoothest landings I've ever made. So,
well, the reason I wanted you to tell that story, I didn't know all those details, but I knew something about it, is it feeds into what we talk about on this show. And that is grace under pressure, knowing your skills, trusting yourself, trusting your equipment, and no matter what you do, you're a pilot, you're a writer, you work in a heavy machine industry, you're a football player, anything. You got to trust your gear, you got to trust yourself, and you got to know that you're equipped to deal with life head on.
Absolutely.
And that's what you've been doing. You're having fun doing it.
I am and have, and I'm glad it's over. And I really don't miss flying now. I enjoyed every minute of it, or mostly every minute of it, while I was doing it.
Except those few moments. But even those few moments of terror, you look back and you enjoyed it.
I'm very grateful for it. And I saw the Sully Sullenberger movie, and I literally had, I don't mind saying, I had tears in my eyes because of the realism of the movie there with Tom Hanks. That was a really good movie. And I thought, boy, that could have been me.
Yes.
And it would have been a really ugly crash.
Yeah, exactly. You had to. Yeah, you more so than just about anybody else could relate to that movie. Like none of us mortals can, so to speak.
Absolutely. So, and to hitchhike, if I may, on what you just said, which is a very important point. None of us, regardless of our profession in life or our role, none of us knows fully in advance until we're in a situation. In a dire situation, you don't know what you'll do. For example, if there's a raging river and a loved one or a small child or something falls down into it, you can't really say what you'll do, but because if you go in after somebody, whether it's a dog or a person, you may very well die at that minute. But you rise to the occasion based on, your
values,
fortitude, your values, your constitution, your life's experience, or your instinct.
Yes.
And you have to rely on that. That's what life's all about, because we don't know from one minute to the next what unpredictable situation you may find yourself in.
On that beautiful note, thank you for being on the podcast.
You're so welcome, Jim. Great seeing you again.
Yes, you too. Thank you.